The sharp smell of sweat and the dampness of rotting wood. That's the first thing you remember. You're sitting inside a cart, lurching eastward. The ropes around your wrists have torn into your skin. Every jolt restarts the burning. The woman beside you hasn't said a single word in 3 days. Her eyes are fixed, nailed to the horizon, as if the moment she stops looking, everything will finally become real. Your name was Zarina. You were 16 years old. You were the daughter of a silk merchant in Samarkand. Just a month ago, you were sitting at your mother's knee, learning to weave. She was passing down a pattern she had learned from her own grandmother. The same motif, 4 generations deep. Your city is gone now. That motif is gone with it. The cavalry came at dawn, without screaming, without panic, silently, methodically, and for that reason, more terrifying. They didn't set fire to everything at once the way other armies did. First came the scribes, men with ink-stained fingers moving through the survivors, making notes on their scrolls. They separated you from your mother in under an hour. You screamed her name, she screamed yours. A soldier struck her chest so hard the air emptied from her lungs. When you looked up, she was being dragged toward another line, toward the group moving in the direction of the river. You never saw her again. A man cupped your face in his hands, turned your chin left, then right, looked at your teeth the way you'd examine a horse at market. He wrote something on his scroll, pressed an ink mark onto your wrist, a number. That was your identity now, and the cart kept moving east. This is the story of what the Mongols did to the women of the lands they conquered. They didn't kill them. Death would have been mercy. They kept them, used them, and erased their identities, slowly, systematically. Because Genghis Khan had understood something few conquerors before him had grasped. A sword wins a battle, but a womb produces a century. The most devastating part is not only what he did, it's how effective it was. In 2003, geneticists at the University of Oxford published a study on the Mongol genetic legacy. The findings reverberated through the scientific world. Approximately 16 million men alive today carry the same Y-chromosome signature. You may be one of them. If this story has caught hold of you, leave a like and subscribe. It takes only a second, but it allows us to keep bringing silenced voices back to the surface. But to understand what happened to Zarina, you first need to understand the man who built the system that swallowed her. Because Genghis Khan was not born a legend. The title Universal Ruler came to him later. He was still 30 years away from earning it. In 1171, he was simply a 9-year-old boy named Temujin, kneeling beside his father's body on the frozen Mongolian steppe. Yesugei had been a respected, feared clan chief. Now, he was a body, poisoned by a rival tribe at a feast, the ultimate betrayal of steppe hospitality. The foam at the corner of his mouth had not yet dried. Within a week, the allies scattered. His mother Holin was left alone on the steppe with 5 children in one of history's harshest winters. The steppe taught them hunger too. They dug for roots, trapped marmots, ate whatever moved. By the time Temujin was 9, he had grasped the first and harshest truth of existence. The world is divided into those who take and those who are taken. By the time he was 16, that lesson had stopped being abstract. His betrothed, Berta, was kidnapped by the Merkits. He searched for her for 8 months. When he found her, Berta was pregnant. Whose child was it? His or one of her captors? He never knew with certainty. But standing among the burnt tents before the bodies of dead Merkits, something else crystallized in his mind. The men who took a woman could die. But what was done to the woman lived on in the child. And in the children that child would bear. Conquest by sword is temporary. Armies are defeated, empires collapse, but lineage endures. He raised Berta's son as his own. But the lesson learned in that camp never left him. In 1206, the Mongol tribes proclaimed him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The hungry child of the steppe now commanded the largest cavalry force history had ever seen. And the truth he had learned in his youth, he would apply at a scale beyond imagination. Now let us return to Zarina, to the cart heading east. The cart finally stops. Zarina doesn't know how many days have passed. 8? 10? Without sunlight, time dissolves. Ahead of them sprawls a camp, tents and wagons stretching to the horizon. Dozens of vehicles full of women. Some are crying. Some sit in silence. Some stare at nothing. A Mongol woman walks the length of the line. Not a prisoner, an overseer. She holds a wooden tablet, taking notes the way one might check grain stocks. She stops at Zarina's cart, looks at the mark on her wrist, makes a notation. Officers section. Zarina doesn't yet know what it means, but she will learn. This order was not built in a single night. Genghis Khan systematized it over years. The first major rehearsal came in 1209 against the Tangut kingdom. Other conquerors burned, destroyed, plundered, and moved on. He sent scribes ahead of his army. Disguised as merchants, they infiltrated cities. They measured women the way generals measure wall heights. Age, health, lineage, all recorded before the first arrow flew. When the Tangut cities fell, the real processing began. Men who could fight were either killed or conscripted by force. The elderly were released to carry fear to the next city. Women were sorted with the precision of a merchant grading silk. The young, healthy, and fertile were marked and loaded onto caravans. The old, the sick, the injured were left behind. The Mongols had a phrase for them: not worth feeding. Genghis Khan supervised the system personally. He reviewed the records, compared the numbers, spent 3 days at the head of this bureaucracy. Because for him, conquest was not merely the taking of land, it was the rewriting of the future. How many women were taken? How many arrived at their destinations alive? How many gave birth? For Genghis Khan, the matter had moved beyond conquest. It was now about yield. Deaths in transit were too high. Birth rates were not meeting expectations. New orders were issued. Better rations, basic medical care for pregnant women, disciplinary penalties for soldiers who damaged valuable inventory. This was not compassion. This was optimization. He was building a system, and like every system builder, he measured success by output. Caravan managers reported directly to the center. Monthly tables were prepared, numbers, ratios, production data. Women who could not bear children were reclassified to other labor categories. Those who delivered healthy births were rewarded with better nutrition and comparatively better treatment. The system created incentives, horrifying incentives, but effective ones. There was even specialization. Trained female officers examined new captives, assessing their health, age, and reproductive potential, categorizing them before they ever boarded the caravans. The Mongols called them counters. Their task was clear: maximize output, minimize loss. A young, healthy woman was high value. A woman who had given birth before was considered proven. The sick, the injured, those past childbearing age were seen as a drain on resources. The counters made these determinations in seconds. One look, a mark on the tablet, a hand gesture. Left to the caravans, right, somewhere else. What happened to those sent right was not spoken of. Within 5 years, the model had been refined, expanded, and made operable at imperial scale. This was no longer random plunder. It was a planned, repeatable demographic strategy. Zarina saw him when she had been in the camp 2 weeks. Genghis Khan was older than she had imagined. Mid-60s, his face weathered by wind and war, hard as carved stone. He moved through the camp at a measured pace, not as if reviewing a battlefield, but as if inspecting a warehouse inventory. He stopped in front of the section where Zarina was held. Zarina bowed her head. Looking up was forbidden, but she heard his voice, low, flat, a tone that never rose even when giving commands. Persian ones, those who can read and write, useful for households. Mark them. That was all. Then he walked on. In that moment, Zarina understood the truth. She was not a prisoner, not an ordinary slave. She was a categorized resource, an asset to be allocated. The man who determined her fate had spent less time than he would choosing a horse. By 1219, the system was ready for its greatest test, the Khwarezmian Empire. 15 million people, 400,000 soldiers, one of the most powerful states of its time. The Shah ruled territories stretching from Samarkand to the borders of India. His armies had never known defeat. The trade routes between China and Europe ran under his control. He believed himself untouchable. He made the fatal mistake. One of his governors arrested Mongol trade envoys, seized their goods, and had them all executed. Genghis Khan tried diplomacy first. He sent envoys demanding justice. The Shah had them killed too. He had their beards shaved, a grave insult in Mongol culture, and sent their heads back across the steppe. He thought them a common raiding tribe, barbarians who would scatter at the first serious resistance. He did not know what he had awakened. Genghis Khan assembled his commanders. This campaign would be different. I will give them, he is reported to have said, a lesson they will remember for 1,000 years. I will uproot them so completely that even their descendants' will forget they ever existed. This was not a threat. It was a statement of intent, and he executed every word of it. Samarkand fell in 5 days. The chronicles record that from Samarkand alone, more than 100,000 women were taken. They were separated, classified, distributed. Those of noble birth were given to officers. The educated were directed to administrative households. Those deemed ordinary were distributed among soldiers. Zarina's mother, a woman in her 40s, had almost certainly fallen toward the bottom of the lists. Not worth feeding. Zarina was 16, literate and healthy. She had been marked for the officers' section. For the next 20 years, she would be expected to bear children. But Samarkand was only the beginning. Bukhara fell. The Mongols set fire to the great library. Centuries of accumulated knowledge turned to ash in a single afternoon. Then came Urgench, capital of Khwarezm. The course of the river was diverted. The city was drowned. Those who did not drown were sorted like the others, recorded, distributed. Then Merv. Perhaps the greatest city of that era. Estimates range from 500,000 to 1 million inhabitants, a center holding knowledge from Greece, Persia, India, China, trade, learning, culture. The siege lasted 15 days. When the walls fell, the slaughter began. The chronicles claim more than 1 million people were killed at Merv alone. For 13 days, bodies were counted, piled, the numbers recorded. Even Mongol commanders are reported to have recoiled at this scale. One is said to have remarked, "We made a desert and called it peace." And for every man killed, a woman was taken. The caravan stretched for kilometers. Persian women walked beside Chinese women, chained together, unable to understand one another's languages. All marked, all numbered, all allocated. What you're about to see is how this system began erasing not just individuals, but entire peoples. After 3 months in the caravan, Zarina stopped counting the days. Every day was a copy of the last. Walk, eat what you are given, sleep in chains on the cart. The woman beside her, Fatima, had been a teacher in Bukhara. On the 4th night, she whispered that she had a husband and 2 children. Then she never spoke again. Zarina learned things in the caravan. The things she tried to keep at a distance during the day, she thought about at night. She now knew what the marks on their wrists meant. A single line, general labor. 2 lines, allocated to soldiers. A circle, officers' section. She had also learned that pregnancy was a kind of armor. Pregnant women were given more food, watched more carefully. They were valuable because they were producing. Some women were deliberately trying to become pregnant for this reason. Another way to survive? Others did the opposite. Information passed in whispers, herbs said to prevent conception. Most didn't work. A woman in the cart beside hers tried. She died of blood loss in the night. In the morning, her body was left by the roadside. The caravan did not stop. Children born in the caravan were taken at age 3, given to Mongol families, raised to speak only Mongolian. They grew up without learning their mothers' names, their languages, their stories. The separations were always sudden. One morning the child was there. The next morning, gone. No warning. No farewell. Mothers who resisted had their rations cut. Those who fought back were beaten. Those who tried to hide their children were punished in front of everyone. The message was clear. These children are not yours. They never were. The bond was being severed. That was the point. But what shook Zarina most was something else. She was beginning to forget. The pattern her mother had taught her. That loom motif passed down through 4 generations. At night she tried to trace it in the dirt, but pieces were missing. Was it 3 stitches or 4? Did the border curve left or right? What color was the thread in the center? She couldn't remember. Her mother's face was blurring in her mind. The melody she had hummed at the loom was fading. The smell of the dyes was washing out like a painting left in the sun. She tried to hold on to other things. She tried to remember the name of her street, the narrow view from her window, the smell and taste of the bread her mother baked on holiday mornings. But every day another detail slipped through her fingers. Something she had told herself she would never forget was being erased. A memory she thought was permanent was dissolving. This was how the system worked. Not with swords, with time. Every day in the caravan you moved a little further from yourself. Memories wore down. Language rusted. Identity slowly came undone. And the children who would one day be born would not even know what had been lost. The administrators knew this. They deliberately separated women from the same city. Speaking your native language was not tolerated. Closeness was dispersed. Because isolation accelerates erasure. A woman alone forgets faster than a woman who remembers together with others. Yet some found small ways. At night they whispered names. They taught their children forbidden words before they were taken. They scratched signs into their skin to remind themselves who they were. They developed secret languages only prisoners could understand. Gestures meaning, I remember. Patterns drawn in the earth that only certain eyes could recognize. Some hid objects, a ring buried in the corner of a tent, a scrap of thread from home sewn inside a garment, a small stone from a riverbed they would never see again. Tiny anchors thrown back toward the past, proof that they had existed, like small flames trembling in a dark sea. Most were extinguished, but some continued to burn for years, hidden, concealed, waiting for someone, someday, to see. Do you remember that Oxford study published in 2003? The research on the Mongol genetic legacy. This is what they actually found. A single Y-chromosome lineage that first appeared in Mongolia approximately 1,000 years ago. Approximately 16 million men alive today carry this genetic signature. That is roughly 0.5% of the world's male population. In Mongolia, the rate climbs to 8%. Across Central Asia, approximately 3%. And what is striking, these signatures appear thousands of kilometers from the Mongol homeland. This is not natural dispersal. The most powerful kings left no such trace. The pharaohs ruled for centuries. No comparable pattern exists. Roman emperors had their households. Their genetic impact is almost undetectable. Dispersal at this scale requires something different. A systematic, organized structure sustained across generations. The researchers cannot directly and definitively attribute this to Genghis Khan alone, but the timeline aligns, the geography aligns, the scale aligns. And when you understand the caravans, the classification, the patterns of access, the numbers become unsettlingly coherent. Genghis Khan, his sons, his grandsons, access to hundreds of thousands of women across generations, not randomly, deliberately, within a system sustained generation upon generation. When he died in 1227, the system did not stop. The empire maintained the same mechanism for more than a century. His sons expanded it. His grandsons institutionalized it. For approximately 150 years, the machine kept running. Every generation of Mongol rulers had access to the caravans. Every generation added its own genetic signature to the conquered communities. This was not the story of a single man. This was the story of a dynasty, a system that replicated itself across time. Even when the empire collapsed, the outcome was permanent. The damage was inscribed into the DNA of millions. Those 16 million men are not merely a scientific statistic, they are living proof. The system worked. What was designed came to pass. Somewhere in the world right now, a man may be learning through a genetic test that one of his ancestors was a Mongol warrior, and that trace is the echo of a policy that began in a caravan centuries ago. He may live in Kazakhstan, in Iran, in China, even in Poland. The genetic signature reached that far, but what it carries is not only a chromosomal sequence, it also carries an invisible inheritance, the contribution of a woman who was taken, numbered, allocated, someone who once had a name, who had a family, who had a pattern she was learning at her mother's loom, a life stolen in a single morning. He will never know her name. No one will. But she is still there, in his cells, in his blood, in the genetic chain that makes him who he is. The echo of a girl reduced to a number. The cities are gone now. Merv, perhaps the greatest metropolis of its age, is silent ruins in the Turkmenistan desert today. Most people have never even heard its name. Urgench was destroyed when a river's course was redirected. Today, it is an archaeological site difficult to find on a map. Balkh, Nishapur, Samarkand. Some were rebuilt. Some were erased entirely. And with those cities, the memory the women carried was lost too. The songs they sang, the stories they told their children, the patterns they wove, the food they cooked, the prayers they whispered. Languages spoken for centuries fell silent within a single generation. This is how erasure happens. In 2018, archaeologists excavating a Mongol-era site in Kazakhstan found a woman's grave. The burial style differed from Mongol tradition. Her position and orientation pointed to another culture, as if she had never fully merged with the place she was in. As if even in death, there was a distance. Analysis showed she had spent her childhood in Persian lands and her adult life in Central Asia, more than 2,000 miles from where she was born. Her bones indicated at least 6 births, perhaps more. Her teeth revealed childhood malnutrition, followed by more regular nutrition in later years. The biological record of a life transformed from freedom to captivity, from hunger to controlled sustenance, from person to property. 2 objects had been buried with her. One was a small bronze mirror, Persian in style, something from her former life. An object she had likely kept hidden for decades, something she looked into whenever she needed to remember who she was. The other was a child's toy, Mongolian in design, from her new life, a life she had not chosen. She was between 45 and 50 years old when she died. Perhaps she had lived to see her grandchildren. Perhaps one of those grandchildren became one of the millions carrying that genetic signature across centuries. This is the system's true trace, not only in the conquered lands, but inside a person. Descendants who spoke Mongolian, who prayed to the eternal sky, who never knew their grandmothers once had a different name. She carried that Persian mirror for 30 years. Every night she looked into it, trying to remember who she had once been, that she had been a merchant's daughter, a girl learning a pattern at a loom. Zarina probably did not survive. But let us imagine she did. Let us imagine she lived into her 40s, that she had children, that she watched them being taken from her arms at age 3, that she bore again and watched again, over and over. Imagine she kept something small from Samarkand, a thread from her mother's loom, a stone from her courtyard, a fragment of that unfinished pattern, something she held at night, something that reminded her she had once been Zarina. Imagine she whispered her real name every night, in a language no one around her spoke anymore. Zarina, Zarina, Zarina. A meaningless sound to those who had taken her, everything to her. Perhaps she was still whispering it the day she died, but her children did not hear it. They were raised as Mongols. They spoke a language she had never learned. They worshipped gods she did not know. When they buried her, they did not know what name to write on her grave. So they wrote nothing. And the silence grew. For 800 years. But silence is not erasure. To be forgotten is not to cease to have existed. The women in the caravans left behind no diaries, no memoirs. They were not permitted to write, but they left something else, something the Mongols had not planned for: DNA. Genetic traces woven into the blood of descendants who would never know their names. A record scattered across continents, carried inside cells. Approximately 16 million men alive today carry that trace. This is not only proof of Genghis Khan's conquest, it is also proof of the women he tried to erase. They lived, they endured, they were silenced. But they did not entirely disappear. Their ghosts were written into chromosomes, scattered across continents, carried in the blood of strangers who will never know their names, waiting for someone to remember. This is Sable historians. We don't polish history, we don't sterilize it. We show what actually happened. Because the past is not dead, it is standing in the dark, waiting for someone to speak its name. What other stories has the world tried to bury? Write in the comments. And if you want us to keep opening these dark archives, subscribe.